Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now, in the past, you'll know that I have been speaking with many people about the rollout of 5G and these lollipop towers, as I call them, that are springing up like daffodils all over the place. Well, interestingly enough, a lot of these are being pushed back and are being objected. In fact, in Bath alone, 99 have failed to transpire because people have objected to it. And this is going on up and down the country. Now, we're at a critical time with this because we need all these groups, all these people who are objecting and doing this incredible work, who have the law on their side to say why we don't want it, to come together and unite. People are beginning to understand about the injections that people were given, that medical interference that we had only a few months ago. The news is leaking out left, right, and centre about that. People are objecting and know about the LTNs, the low emission zones, and all of that. But this one is the big one because so much depends on the 5G technology and how the smart cities will operate. And there's a lot of people who are very concerned that perhaps we're not giving enough focus on it. But we are going to do that today. So joining me to discuss this and to talk about what's going on, we have Karen Churchill and Stephen Thomas. Hello to Stephen, who's there first of all. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Hello, Richard. Hi, good afternoon.
It's very kind of you to spend me your time to tell us about what's going on in your area. And Karen Churchill, hello to you.
Richard, good afternoon.
Good
Thanks for
afternoon.
welcoming us today.
Well, I'm very excited to find out news about this because this is something that is very not only important, but I'm passionate about not seeing it because where I am, they are bunging up these towers and we're all a bit worried. And I've had so many emails from so many different people saying they were concerned for their health, about the radiation. I've had people like Ian Jarvis on talking about the fraudulent activity of the limited companies who may or may not be rolling these things out, and the complicit nature of the councils who are putting these things out despite what the general public are saying, whether they want them or not. So we've got lots to get into. So I suppose first of all we should talk about you guys, how you who you are and how you met. Who would like to go ahead with that first?
Shall I make a start, Stephen?
Please, yeah, please do, Karen.
Yes. I first became aware of 5G back in 2019. I lived just outside Frome. I became aware that Glastonbury were doing a lot of work investigating it, and they had voted for the precautionary principle. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that I too wanted to vote for the precautionary principle. We raised a petition and took it to Frome Council, and they agreed that precaution did apply. Then we went on to Wells and Shepton Mallet, and they also agreed the precaution should apply. But as soon as they'd voted, they warned us that they didn't have any power and they couldn't do anything about it. And that started my journey of finding out what we could do about it and what the actual law said about the matter.
And that's very interesting that the local council can't do anything. I mean, I've always find this difficult to accept that the people in the area that are living there are having to put up with something the council is endorsing, but they say they've got no control over it, which
And the
just
thing is,
seems.
it's not quite true because there is a policy from the government that says that they cannot do certain things. But if you delve a little bit deeper, the local authority do have powers and obligations which they could and can exercise. And that's what Stephen and I have been up to, is pressing into the councils and making sure and asking them to exercise their full responsibilities in reconciling the risk when they make a decision about where a mast is going.
So, Stephen, yes, let's hear from you.
Just to jump in there, but ultimately the buck stops with the councils. They are responsible for the siting of the mast, and as much as they try to obfuscate, the buck stops with them. And it's just not good enough what's been happening. So I've took a legal case on against Cheltenham Borough Council where they put a mast up 17 meters away from someone's house. There's no vertical separation from the top of the antenna. It's literally firing straight into their apartment.
Blimey.
17 meters. And you've also got the proximity to the retirement home, about 100 meters away, where there's people with pacemakers, hearing aids, etc. And all of these health concerns, they just get washed under the carpet. They accept these fraudulent certificates, which you're well aware of, and they think that these fraudulent certificates are sufficient to stop them having to take into account anything to do with health. And it's just not good enough. It's not good enough at all. And this really is like a huge kind of test, if you like, of the judiciary. So I had the court case a couple of months ago, and at the judicial review, where the judge actually partly ruled in my favour that there was a material planning consideration with regards to the proximity of the retirement home, where people had objected. There was one person who objected on the basis of their pacemaker. That was completely ignored, and that was what the judge ruled in the favour of.
Wow.
But he didn't go so far as to quash the decision. And I think just as important as that is the exclusion zones. So around every mast, there's an area which is non-compliant. So the UK government have adopted ICNA as the as basically as the guidelines that operators should be following. And there's a lot of problems with ICNA. I mean, that is a separate conversation in itself. There's huge problems with ICNA. It's industry funded. The limits are way too high. But regardless of that, is the fact that operators aren't even adhering to ICNA. They're not providing the exclusion zones around masts. They're
And
not.
what would be an exclusion zone? What are we sort of talking about?
So an exclusion zone around a mast is where it's unsafe, where the threshold limits are being breached. And that happens on every single mast. And operators are meant to map out those diagrams to show where those non-compliant regions are. And they're not doing that. And they're building deliberately into homes in full knowledge that there's a breach. And they're getting away with it because there's a public exclusion zone, which is a lot more conservative, and there's an occupational exclusion zone. And the occupational exclusion zone is a lot more relaxed because it's deemed to be workers there who are only going to be present, say, for 8 hours. They're covered by health and safety regulations. I don't know if you've got the slides up that we prepared for you, just to kind of visually show this.
Yes, let's let me just go and quickly find those and put them on the screen. So let's go back to the. Here's the first slide.
So typically an exclusion zone is around 50 meters in radius. This is what's called a step 1 configuration. Operators can reduce the power if there's a breach. But by and large, the exclusion zone is around 50 meters. And you can see there the occupational worker zone, which is in black. You can see obviously that is a lot more relaxed. It's a lot smaller.
I mean, it's very. I mean, when you say an exclusion zone is 50 meters, it's hard to imagine that you could actually then site these down any streets, certainly domestic streets, because automatically, surely most houses are going to be within that, aren't they?
Well, they're supposed to be high up enough to give them vertical clearance. So you can see from that diagram that it's the exclusion zone is 10 meters in height from the ground.
Right.
So the idea is that those exclusion zones go over people's residences, but that's not the case in the Cheltenham situation. So I think if you go to slide 2, you can see here that there's absolutely zero vertical separation from the top of the antenna. And the top part of that building, it looks like it's some kind of roof structure. It's actually people's residential apartments. So there's a clear exclusion zone breach there. And the crucial thing is that the planner at the time, didn't assess where that non-compliant boundary was. All he was concerned about on his officer's report was what it looked like from people's bedroom windows. Absolutely shocking.
Yes.
And this is happening
And
up and down the country. They're just rubber stamping these applications using fraudulent certificates where there's clear breaches, even ICNIRP breaches, which is putting the health and safety of the public at risk.
And nobody's aware of who's liable then. I mean, these fraudulent certificates then sort of throw the liability of if somebody's being radiated completely off the chart, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, who is going to be? You can't sue a company that no longer exists, and the council going to pick up the problem, or the government.
Precisely.
I think the government, can I just say something? The government seemed to be convincing everybody that the Ofcom take the measurements on the street, and they at Canary Wharf, the maximum that they've recorded and present on the website is 1.5% of the total ICNIRP limit. So they're creating this illusion that it's so low that it's not a problem. So they're putting the pressure on the local councils, and even the judge in Stephen's case um, seemed to accept that there wasn't really a problem to be worried about, and they don't need to look at these zones and they don't need to check anything because there's nothing to worry about. Because they're creating this message that 5G is safe, 4G is safe, non-ionizing radiation can't damage cells, but it's not true. And those recordings, according to a Luxembourg European study, are experimental because 5G beams are so narrow, it's actually very difficult to measure them. So the measurement techniques aren't reflective of the actual radiation exposure.
Do we know if there's anywhere where this technology has been tested in a real life situation? I mean, if they put these 5G towers around the Houses of Parliament, for example, for 5 years, and then see how many people have been affected by it, we could at least then say we've got something to measure it by. And it would be difficult to know if MPs have been affected by it because they're obviously affected by all sorts of things. But
we do have some recent research by Leonard Hardell, who's looked at the health effects when 5G is placed on roof antennas in Sweden. There's about 6 studies, and that's all. Of all the research, only 6 studies of 5G in situ. And in all cases, there are health effects.
Right.
Dizziness, tinnitus, and that research needs to be taken into account. We're pushing for that research to be taken into account and not dismissed by the government or the local councils.
I mean, we said at the beginning, people are aware of, even if we give them the credibility of coming out with a vaccine for a problem that we had in 2020, and that the vaccine was just brought out at the speed of science, as they said, and it turns out that perhaps it's not the best thing to have done. Rushing something through that has not been fully tested seems to be exactly what's going on here. Rushing, again, another national product which hasn't had adequate testing, and the tests that you've just alluded to do have a problem. It seems bizarre that the government would want to do this. Now, I would argue that there are nefarious reasons and they're being pressured from above, but let's not go down the conspiracy theory for that. But just in and of itself, we know that rushing something which has not had proper testing and also has fraudulent certificates, for goodness sake, is something that everybody should be wary about.
Yeah, totally agree.
Do you want to go through any more of the slides whilst we've got them here, just to...
Yeah, just on the certificates there. I mean, as Ian Jarvis said on your show not so long ago, there's literally thousands of these up and down the country. So if it's safe and there's nothing to worry about, why are they issuing all these fraudulent certificates?
Exactly.
It's not an administrative error, which the judge had stated in my case. He just alluded to the defendant that it was an administrative error, a checkbox exercise. Um,
Gosh.
it's absolutely diabolical. But if you just go back to those slides, Richard,
Yes. Let me just grab them up on the screen here.
I think it's like slide number 3.
Yeah.
Yes, this one. So this is a rooftop structure, Barry House. I think this is in London. But you can see here both the occupational work, occupational exclusion zone in blue, which is obviously not penetrating into apartments. And then you've got the public exclusion zone in red, which is clearly penetrating into the apartments below. And if you look at the right-hand side there, the telecoms company themselves have said these diagrams are not to be shown to anyone, not to the planning officer, the public. They're not to be shown. Why is that? And you
Abs-
can.
it,
It's
that's
absolutely
staggering, isn't it?
it's diabolical. And in this particular example, the operator had even issued an ICNIRP certificate, even though it wasn't ICNIRP compliant. So
That
it's just absolutely meaningless what these pieces of paper are actually worth.
Yes. I mean, if you didn't want to go down the nefarious route, it's hard to sort of prove that there isn't a mandated plan to have these out. I mean, it's very difficult if people just saying, "Hang on a minute, this does just not hold water in and of itself." That there are all these problems. We should be looking at those before we do this. But it does seem as if, as we've said, wrong certificates, dodgy companies doing it, councils not listening to it, the government pushing it on people. The dangers are clearly visible, and here we go. We've got people saying, "Don't show the details to the public or anybody."
It's an absolute disgrace. It's sham regulation. The councils, the government, they don't care about the public whatsoever. Um, I mean, in my particular case, where we're going to the Court of Appeal at the moment, but the council have actually put in a separate appeal against the decision that there was a material planning consideration for the people at the retirement home. And the council have turned around in no uncertain terms and have said that it would put too much responsibility and pressures on them if they have to go and check the people with vulnerabilities in the area. It's not their responsibility. It would derail the speed of the rollout, to quote their terminology. It's unbelievable.
That
Absolutely
is
unbelievable.
absolutely staggering. Going back to your, if I can find it again, going back to your slides, here we go. You've got this one here, Gerrard's Cross Fire Station.
So you can see in this situation where both the occupation and the public exclusion zones are going straight into the fire tower on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they've managed to get hold of these exclusion zones, but it goes to show that operators are clearly building out into buildings with no regard to safety.
Yes. And if, I mean, as you said before, if it's going into buildings where people are working, if they're there for 8 hours a day, that's 5 days a week. 8 hours, 5 days a week. That's a lot of exposure, week in, week out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the ways that they're manipulating the situation is Ofcom, who's the national regulator, have decided what the definition of a worker and a public member is, which actually differs to the ICNIRP company that create the guidelines. So this is why in the Barry House, you can see that they've decided, oh, only workers will be in that building. So therefore we can put the public zone into that building because they think that the employer will inform them and protect them. And that is a manipulation of ICNIRP's intent.
So I mean, what does that mean? That the employer has now got to put a Faraday cage around the whole building so that their workforce is not affected. I mean, that's just ridiculous, isn't it?
They're supposed to be doing risk assessments, and that would be a very interesting survey to see how many offices up and down the country have actually risk assessed the Wi-Fi in their offices. But
Mm,
according to health and safety at work legislation, they should be providing and doing a risk assessment. And again, if you've got a new 5G mast outside your building, do the planners tell the office building? No. Do they realize, the interaction between the Wi-Fi equipment inside buildings and Wi-Fi equipment outside buildings is not being considered because the ICNET regulations are based on a single device. And they do say, oh, we've taken into account other masts in the area, but have they taken into account the interference with smart technology in the home? No, definitely not. So that
right.
accumulative effect is not being
Yes.
assessed.
And I suppose they can't possibly know how many people in a block of flats have got Wi-Fi and smartphones and then smart meters and all of that. I mean, you'd have to go around everybody's house and count everything up, take measurements in every room. I mean,
Yes.
it would be. I mean, they obviously don't want to do it because it would be too time consuming and probably mean that they couldn't put their ruddy
That's
towers
right.
where they want to.
And
Just to
there's
jump
one
in,
one
Yeah.
sorry,
Yes. Sorry, Stephen.
just to jump in, those exclusion zones are built around 4G. So most 5G masts are a combination of 3G, 4G, and 5G, and those exclusion zones are modelled around 4G. Now we don't know what the true extent of the exclusion zone for 5G is because it's beamforming. And
Right.
there's actually a slide. I think it's slide number 6, Richard.
Let's get
Um,
that. I don't know what slide we're on at the moment, but
this is the one.
excellent.
So Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the New Hampshire Commission, he did some studies around 5G, and he came to the conclusion that the exclusion zone for 5G was around 500 meters,
Wow.
and the information on that can be seen in the web address below. Um,
And, I mean, that is, you've got whole field systems in there in that red zone, and obviously you've got houses in there. But the 500 meters, I mean, that's a huge amount of area. So these things should not be in a town at all.
no, they shouldn't. And as Karen said, there's no risk assessment, and these things can travel actually for tens, if not hundreds of miles under the sub gig frequencies. Um, and if you've got multiple base stations that are all interacting with street furniture, such as the 5G in the street lights, it's creating an absolute toxic minefield for people living in those areas.
Mm.
There's one
Like,
of health effects that the government don't talk about and don't regulate against, and that's something called microwave hearing. And
right.
it's like a popping, buzzing, and clicking is how it's recorded. So it's closely related to tinnitus. How the overlap with a tinnitus diagnosis happens, we're not quite sure, but nonetheless, this effect is identified, and there's a limit within the regulations to protect people from hearing. And yet, that limit is not recognised by the planners, by the government, or Ofcom, and it's about 100 times less than the basic limit. So it's around 4.34 volts per meter. We've seen that in Canary Wharf, in Hatfield, and in one other place and we've seen
Charing
it on the
Cross.
streets in Bath, in Gloucester. We've measured 10 volts per meter outside the Bath College in Bath. So for me, this is a pivot point and something that we really need to raise awareness because tinnitus is on the rise. All the
Mm.
tinnitus charities are really reporting the number of people that are phoning in with this condition. And people aren't being informed that it just might be their exposure to Wi-Fi. And if there is
Yes.
a limit within the regulations, then that limit needs to be observed. That's one thing that we can act on.
Okay. I mean, we're nearly through your slides. Let's just finish off with those, if we may. So that's that one. Who's
So
going to talk
just
us through?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
sorry,
just
Karen.
showing there's a document created by Ericsson who they were exploring what would happen if we lowered the exposure limits, because there's a lot of evidence that they do need to be lowered, and some countries have got a hundredth of the exposure limits that we've got. So if you see on the next slide, it shows this is where the exclusion zone would be if they lowered it to a hundredth of the current limit. And you can see just how it makes it. The whole point of the Ericsson paper was to show that it would be drastic to the rollout to lower the limit.
And I mean, you've got it illustrated there, all in blue. And of course, it's invisible, which is why a lot of people, because you can't see something, you don't feel it's affecting you. But obviously, if you're feeling dizzy, you've got tinnitus or any other headaches or memory loss and things like that, it's as real as if you could see it.
Absolutely. 96% of all research, industry and independent research shows that non-ionizing radiation causes oxidative stress, and that is an accepted mechanism for cancer. So whenever the government they claim that non-ionizing radiation does not harm cells or does not harm DNA, it is not true. It does. The
Right.
research is very clear about that.
Yeah. I think
So,
the judge in my case, Karen, he came out with that statement and he quoted it directly from the telecom's promotional material, which was quite shocking for a judge to claim it as his own statement.
what sort of court case? What court was this in? Was it? It wasn't a magistrate's court,
No, this was at the High Court. It was
right?
full judicial review for one day.
And were they? Do you sort of think that they're qualified to comment on all of this? This is all highly technical stuff. Are they up to speed on it all?
Well, they're obviously qualified in terms of planning law, but they're certainly not qualified to give statements like the one that he did.
Right.
It's not in his remit. He's not qualified to do so. And I think the most shocking thing was he had just literally quoted it from the telecom's propaganda and put
Yes.
it in his summary judgment as if it was his own ruling.
And I mean, history is going to judge all these people as we are judging, going back to the sort of the vaccine, as something which, again, as we've said, is not fully researched to the health of people, especially if people don't want it. I mean, they're surely all of what the government are pushing out should be for the benefit of people. I'd love to know who's demanding these 5G towers and causing the same stink that, say, people who don't want it are by saying, well, I want it, I want it. Where is the argument from the people who are desperate for it?
Well, precisely. I mean, we've seen applications where there's been some 300 plus objections and not a single motion of support, and they've still been approved. I
Which
mean,
is
it's
just
it's
bonkers.
outrageous.
Yes. I
Yes.
mean, and these are supposed to be our public servants, which of course I think we're all beginning to realise now on all sorts of different counts is absolutely laughable.
And there's one aspect with the electrohypersensitivity. People are suffering from a condition, and I think it's 3 to 5%, an estimated part of the population who have this condition, and yet the government uh, are insinuating it's psychological, whereas there's plenty of research to show it is not psychological. And we've got court cases that are judging the science that support the diagnosis that it has a physical basis.
Mm.
And
So,
there's no mechanism for giving the feedback. When you write to the council and tell them that you're experiencing these symptoms since a master's gone up in your area, they they just ignore the
So there's no
reports.
yellow card like we saw during the
Exactly,
vaccine. Yeah, where you say,
exactly.
actually, I've been damaged by this. And clearly, with the amount of concern, there ought to be some form of reporting process.
And when they're intensifying the 5G exposure closer to the population with these trials in Bath, where is the monitoring of the health? effects of what they're doing. There's absolute, all the attention is how clever they are to create faster signal and experimenting with AI to monitor the spectrum, but there is no attention to detail in terms of surveys or, you know, monitoring people's the effect on people's health or well-being. And when it comes to the environment, you know, ICNIRP are only just beginning to think, oh, do we need limits for non-human species? And yet the the research that has been done shows that, like for humans, that all the cellular functioning of trees and bees and is affected by, and they're only just beginning to think of doing research, but they're rolling it out with these next generation of developments with these trials with no attention to any testing whatsoever.
And presumably we're all paying for it in the taxes.
770,000 in Bath invested in a 18-month trial.
Yeah, no wonder they're trying to get the council tax out of every last person, and every other sort of tax to pay for this nonsense. Let's finish your slides, if we may. So this is who's going to explain this one?
And this is a small cell. Now, the small cells are, you know, what are put on the lampposts closer to the buildings. They link back to the towers. But this just shows that, like with the Stephen's explaining the exclusion zones from Mars, there is an exclusion zone around these boxes as well. And obviously it depends on the power and the frequency, but the power and the frequency is withheld from the public. We don't know where these safe zones are. So if they're too close to a building or they're pointing in the wrong direction, you may be affected directly by emissions from these small cells as well.
And you said the small cells are mounted on, did you say lampposts?
Lampposts, yeah, posts that have got CCTV cameras on them. Yeah.
And will they be obvious? I mean, could you see which one has them on and which one doesn't? You know, if you're looking at a lamppost or a traffic light or something, one of the existing bits of street furniture.
Yeah, in the Bath trials, they look like black square boxes, and then underneath the black square boxes are rectangular blocks. So that's what they look like.
And there we are. There's just
sometimes they're white, but the Bath ones are going to be black because they're trying to say it meets the, you know, heritage standard.
No. Yes, all the usual nonsense. The heritage standard of what we've always had is those lovely 5G towers everywhere. We've had them for years. The Victorians had them. Yeah, right. So where do we go from here? What we've got. So this is all part of. We mentioned the smart cities, and we've, you know, everything with the word "smart" in front of it does seem to be a bit of an oxymoron, really, because it seems to be the opposite of smart. It may be smart for the government or surveillance and that sort of thing, but it doesn't actually seem to be very useful for the general public and the people who live in the areas that it's being shoved in. We've seen that with the so-called smart motorways, in which people have died because they've had to stop and there's no hard shoulder. And cars and other things, when the technology fails, they've found lorries have ploughed into the back of them. People are worried about the smartphones, obviously, because they're radiating, and people are advised not to hold them up to their ears because of the WEMF. So this is part of, and you've given me a link to the government, which I've also got, which I can show if I'm very clever.
I mean, Karen, do you just want to quickly talk about the central case that you're pursuing as well?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, do. Okay, we can come back to that.
What's happened in Stephen's case is really highlighted the importance of the challenge that Neil McDougall and myself are making against the government. Because the barrister who's appealing Stephen's case is saying to the court, we need direction how the local authorities are supposed to take the metal implant risk into account. And that's exactly what we're going to the government and saying, that you've not instructed the local authorities how to risk assess. You haven't informed them that they should be risk assessing, and that your policy needs updating to reflect the law. Because in December 2020, the European Electronics Communication Code was transposed into UK law. And at that point in time, the government acknowledged Ofcom's responsibilities, but they didn't acknowledge and inform that the local authorities have a role that is directly assigned within that piece of law. That piece of law says that it's the local authorities who should be weighing up the risk. So in September last year, we sent a letter to the government, and we said, look, some authorities are saying that they are a competent authority and they have to weigh the risk, but the majority aren't. Because in Mendip, there was one mast that was refused on health grounds after they looked at all the information that we gave them about the 500-meter setback, about the extra vulnerability of children, the extra vulnerability of people with metal implants, and they refused it. They said, no, actually, there's not enough evidence of safety to proceed. But if you go to other councils, they keep saying they can't do that. But the Mendip example was the application of this piece of law in practice. So the government they didn't reply for a couple of months, and then they said, oh, you've challenged the wrong department. And then they said, yeah, that, oh, Ofcom are the regulators. Basically, they're responsible for it all. And you're out of time. You can't use the exit law, the EU exit law, to make this challenge. So the first judges agreed with their defence, and now we're taking them to appeal. We're at the appeal stage now, and yeah, we're just taking one step at a time and keep presenting the fundamental arguments.
I would love to know if there are other groups and societies up and down the countryside, or individuals who are clubbing together to do exactly this, because this is what I think people need to know, that it is possible to keep putting the pressure on and keep taking them to court, and keep asking these questions, rather than think, oh, there's nothing we can do, and feel completely impotent about it.
There's two really good Zoom groups that happen every week, on a Sunday night and a Wednesday night. And anybody who wants to learn more how to use the arguments that we've developed, they can join the Zooms, and they can go to RF Info, sign up to the newsletter, follow the blogs, and all the information we put there for people to use. And there's a lot happening now in Scotland, in the Wirral, and in Swansea. So there are active groups who are becoming informed and taking action, but we need to connect up more with a wider audience. And we really need to squash this misinformation being given out by the government that 5G is safe. It's not safe. It's not been tested. And when it is tested, it's shown to be harmful.
Yes, it's the old safe and effective message, which we have heard time and time again. And we know that when the government says something's safe, you can bet your bottom dollar it's the opposite. Or at least it's like, well, prove it. Prove it's safe. But not at our expense, not by rolling out thousands of these posts and then 10 years down the line going, oops, we made a bit of a blunder, as we may see with the vaccine. We need to take the precautionary principle, as you mentioned right at the beginning, right now, and everyone needs to get on board with that.
And we need people to be present in Bath on July the 6th, and join the Telegram group and be there and express this. We do not consent to this domination and complete ignorance and overturning of our needs.
So I've got here a date, the 28th of June, outside the council building opposite TK Maxx, that you're asking people to turn up at.
Yes, the date keeps changing. We've just
Oh,
set it in the last couple of days because certain people can't come, and then some
right.
people want the Friday or Saturday. But if we put a note when we post up the video, then we'll put the date underneath the video, and then and a link to the Telegram group so
Right.
that people can
Okay.
go there and get the details. That would be good.
Absolutely. But I mean, you see people protesting outside various different organisations on a regular basis. I'm guessing that a one-off thing would be great in numbers, but generally just keeping that drip drip message to them to say, actually, I don't want this. We don't consent. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and there's so many holes. And you've been explaining many of them. I was just going to show that for people to go off and read, and we'll leave the link in the description here about the smart cities. And this has been up for some time, of course, but this is it. The UK cities will be helped to get smart thanks to the launch for the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills for the smart cities. And it describes exactly what that is. And as I say, smart city may not be quite what we think it might be, but it's being sold to us by something that we all apparently need, and I was going to say want, but nobody actually wants it. What do you think? I mean, it is encouraging, having said all of this, it is encouraging that you were telling me in Bath, 99 masts have been stopped. So it is possible. I mean, we're not on a
Actually,
hiding to nothing.
yeah, that's in Bristol. Bath aren't refused about half, I think,
Oh,
but
I beg your
It's
pardon.
Bristol. Yeah,
That's
it's
Bristol.
Bristol. It
Okay.
is
Well,
very encouraging.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it would be lovely to get the figures of all the different cities and towns where there has been, because we get so much bad news on things like these sort of shows on YouTube now, and it would be nice to give people the sense that we can do something about this. We have the tools, and you've been providing the arguments there that we have the tools, and we can go and do this rather than just think, well, what's the point? They're always against us. They always get their own way, but not necessarily if we stand up to it.
absolutely. I think 6 months ago we were on about 68% refusals. So more refusals than approvals. Well, countrywide that was. I don't know what the
Wow.
latest figures are. It's yeah, it's a battle.
I mean, it is a battle, but it's a very laudable battle. Stephen, have you got any added comments you want to add?
Yeah, I think what Cameron was alluding to earlier about getting together in numbers, and certainly at grassroots level, I think people really need to start forming their own local residents associations, getting together in groups, as you alluded to on your monologue a few days ago, um, going along to council meetings, putting pressure on the councils, spreading public awareness, because the change happens at grassroots level. We're trying
Yes.
to instigate change, but ultimately it's grassroots level where the change happens. And the more people get together in their local communities, form residents associations, spread the word, the quicker this nonsense stops. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And,
No.
I think as well, there's we talked about local residents associations, but there is also a national residents association. The website that we provided to you on the slides. Um, So people can go onto the National Residents Association. There's resources on there. Um, there's quite a lot of stuff about 5G. People go around, they take measurements. Um, there's going to be documents that people can download where they can serve notices against people in the council, putting them on notice in their personal capacity, and letting them know that we're not having this. We're absolutely not having it.
And I mean, I think there is appetite now from people who perhaps don't watch things like me and think of me as a conspiracy theorist. We're beginning to see people who don't necessarily know the whole gamut of stuff. They may not have even heard of smart cities or 15-minute cities or whatever, but they're feeling the pinch in the way that the government is approaching them, or the anti-human policies that are coming in. And I think there is a growing appetite of people who are going, hang on a second, what's the rush with all of this? Where is our money going? We haven't asked for this. And the more that we can just encourage people not even to think of the conspiracy arguments at all. It's just, is this going to affect you? Is it going to affect your children? I mean, these 5G towers are going up in schools, for goodness sake. And they went up, a lot of them went up in during the lockdown, and people had no notion of it. I mean, the deceitful nature of any of this should be ringing alarm bells, shouldn't it?
Should. And
I,
just very quickly, but we take the example in Gloucester, where I think all 30 plus masts in Gloucester have gone up without any public consultation. They haven't consulted. They've used fraudulent certificates. Um, we did a deep dive on all 30 applications that have been approved in Gloucester. We found a grand total of 5 objections for the whole 30 masts. They weren't put on the planning portal. No letters were sent out to the public. The first that people knew about them was when they were being installed right outside their front doors. And we put pressure on them, and the head of planning suddenly resigned.
Interesting.
Obviously, nothing to do with that, of course, but it's absolutely shocking what happened in Gloucester, and I'm sure it's not the only place in the country where this is happening, and it's just a complete infringement of people's human rights.
Karen, you wanted to say something?
yeah, it slipped my mind, Richard. I've forgotten what
Oh,
I was going to say.
it doesn't matter. I mean, I think the fact that we're talking about this is going on, and what we need to do is to resolve this honourably, peacefully, because if people are finding that they are getting very frustrated and angry, and people are being hurt, and they ultimately say, we know what it is and you won't admit it, things could get quite ugly. I mean, people are buying chainsaws, not chainsaws, angle grinders to take down certain cameras, which again nobody's asked for. We've seen how it's been going in London with people removing these surveillance cameras and the ULEZ stuff. Again, at the end of the day, people are going to take their own evasive action. It would be nice if we could resolve all of this without the violence, without the anger, and certainly without any criminal offences, when it seems, from everything that you've described, the criminals are the ones putting these things up.
And I think what comes to mind, which is the point I just slipped my mind, is it's about the authoritative nature of the information we're using and the information that we're presenting and the way we present that. And we're so lucky that we've got tremendous scientists and doctors that have created solid research that we can use and present. ICBE emf.org, which will be under the video at the end, is a tremendous organization with solid information that can be totally relied on, because I think one of the battles is information and the information sources and the way it's presented and what we're able to rely on. Because I think if you're new to this subject, you have to feel confident that the sources that you're looking at have, are solid. And the ICBE gives solid information. They presented at the Royal Society of Medicine last summer. There's a series of seminars that everyone can play. And I think if we approach decision makers with solid information that cannot be denied, with the court results, about in the Court of Turin has decided that acoustic neuroma is caused by wireless radiation. We had a case in 21 where a young child was given a low EMF environment at school, so her electrohypersensitivity condition was recognized. So if we can use facts, then we don't need fists.
Yes.
we use solid facts, and then that can't be argued, and also the law, like we're presenting the legal obligation to weigh up the effects before they make this decision. So I think that's where the power is being informed and not being overwhelmed by how much information is available. Choose good sources and, a good hour, and then you can present that information knowing that it comes from a good source.
And you mentioned the word authoritative just now. And I mean, ultimately, for me, it comes down to really a democratic notion that what the people are being asked to have, such as, I mean, I made a video this morning about solar farms, these massive, huge swathes of solar planning that's taking agriculture out of the system, fields, farms, and putting in a technology that people haven't asked for. And the people in the area, who are the ones who've got to live with all of this, who are saying, we don't want it. Same with exactly the same. Ultimately, it must come down to the people who live here, who can turn around and say, actually, we're the ones in charge. We pay you. You're our servants. You should be doing as we ask. And yet you're completely deaf to all the ideas and protests and reasons and the logic and the scientific studies on these things. Why the hell are you in power? I mean,
That's what's shocked and devastated me over the last 5 years. I absolutely shocked to the degree where the public are not being heard and logic is not being processed.
I mean, it just
Devastating.
seems a very dictatorial system in which, we're forced something that we don't want. It's dangerous.
And what I don't like is they pretend. They pretend to consult. They pretend to take things into account. They pretend it's a pretense. I'd rather than just be honest and say, we're imposing this on you. You have no choice, because
Yes.
that's effectively the truth. But
Yes.
with Bath, they put out a consultation. It's manipulated. It's not real. They ask for objections. They don't process them.
No. I think if they told the truth, then you would see pitchforks at dawn, wouldn't you? And that's what they don't want. They want to quell any uprising before it happens by going, oh, well, we've done it, so it's too late. It does seem to be what's happening. Well, as many people as possible need to get onto this and get involved and ask these questions and follow the links in the description that you've very kindly provided. And I've got many videos about this subject with people like Ian, and there are people like Mark Steele out there who are telling us about some of the even more dangers that perhaps you don't want to know about with this technology that it can do. This is a very serious business, and we ignore it at our peril.
Yeah.
Karen, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on and telling us about it. Is there any other bits and bobs that you want to add?
Just to get together in your local groups, really, as I alluded to earlier, get together in your local groups, start organising in your local groups, because that is how change happens.
Yeah, grassroots. Brilliant. Well, thank you, both of you, for coming on and telling us about this. Absolutely fascinating and yet worrying at the same time by the amount of just complete ignoring and batting away of what the people want. This is an ongoing battle, but I am sure we're going to win. And I've taken Bristol. 99 masks have been stopped. Take that as a sign that we can do this. We've just got to get ourselves rallied together. So a big thanks to Karen Churchill and Stephen Thomas for coming on. If you've got any comments, please put them in the comment box, and I'll be back with more monologues and wonderful guests in the meantime. Good luck at the rally. We'll put the date in the description as soon as you let me know what it is, and I wish you well. And I'm sure we'll be coming back to this issue many times yet. Till next time, thanks for watching. Goodbye.